Good luck, and we expect to hear more, so thank you very much. Okay, we're gonna move on to item F2, report on student residence and transfers in the elementary district schools. Dr. Hayden.
Well, this is actually something we've been holding because each agenda has been packed, and Dr. Hayden's been anxious to present this. This allows an opportunity to discuss some points in the district where we have impacts from our attendance areas. And these attendance areas were by and large established in the mid-'80s, and a lot of it was to avoid ordered segregation at that point in time. So you see that a lot of the attendance areas reach into downtown Santa Barbara, and you'll see with some of the cells where we have numbers of students who cross into other areas. I think it's all quite fascinating. So this allows Dr. Hayden to do an initial presentation and allows the board discussion. Dr. Hayden?
Hello, everybody. Yes, Brian is absolutely correct. It's fascinating. What I have here is that I have a map for each of the schools. This is Adams School, and I want to point out that the 372 here is the in-district students that are going to Adams. And then these numbers here are the transfer students, like 9 students from this neighborhood, they live here, 9 students went to Adams. Right now. By the way, this is current data. The accuracy is probably 95–98% because like this data was gathered about 2 weeks ago, and I went in today to check on it, and there's already some students that have moved around. So it's fairly accurate. It's definitely in the ballpark accuracy, so I just wanted to make sure you understood that. The boundaries are also been drawn in. They're quite accurate, but they may not be perfectly accurate. Okay, just so we have the full disclosure here on the boundaries. So this is Adams School, and if we were to go to the other set of slides, I also have broken up 5 of the schools into more distinct. This is Adams again, but you'll see here we've now broken it up into neighborhoods. Once again, the neighborhoods were just conveniently drawn. There's no, secret plan or anything like that. They're just the way that we drew them so that they would make the most sense. And so these are the neighborhoods, and so 27 students live in this neighborhood, went to Adams School. In some of the cases I've drawn more, for Peabody especially, I've actually gone into how many students lived in the neighborhood and went to Peabody versus how many students lived in the neighborhood. So right here, there may be more students living here than 27, but 27 went to Adams School, which is right there. So now, what are some of the, I will go through each of the slides, and you can ask questions, but I'm not going to do any more presentation except for to make a few notes of some of the data points that I observed when I went through this. One of the things is that Monroe picks up a lot of students from neighboring schools, mainly Latino students. Monroe would have 137 fewer students if it did not get intra-district transfers. More or less like the students living in the Monroe district would only compose a school that is 137 students fewer than what goes there right now.
Do you have an overall map so that we could show some of the Monroe attendance area?
Sure, we can go back.
There we
And
go.
down here is Monroe, and this little district right here is also Monroe. So these students go to Monroe, and these students go to Monroe. If Monroe only drew from these 2 areas, the school would be 137 students fewer than what it is now, which is quite interesting. Washington, which is this district right here, this area boundaries right here, plus this area over here. I was not here when these boundaries were made. So these 2 areas here go to Washington School. The same thing for Washington. If only these students went to Washington and no other students went to Washington, they would have 126 fewer students going to Washington School. Adams, which is this school right here, receives a very large number of transfers from Peabody. The number of transfers coming from Peabody is larger than any of the other transfers in the district. So it's the largest shift of students in the district. The vast majority of these transfers are Latino students. And almost all of the transfers to Adams are Latino students. Peabody gets, Washington gets the largest number of white students transferring to Washington, but that's a large, part of that is the gate magnet program that's there. Peabody is the second. It gets the second largest number of white students transferred to Peabody. It has by far the largest number of inter-district transfers, 65. You notice, like, this is Adams, it's got 9, that's more normal, but Peabody has 65. Some of its neighboring schools, like Roosevelt area and Adams area and so forth, have large numbers of white students transferring into Peabody. Franklin and Cleveland, that's Franklin here, and that's Cleveland here. Large school district, Cleveland, it's a boundary. But anyway, they have about 60 some students transfer from Cleveland areas into Franklin, and Franklin has about 60 students transferring from Franklin into Cleveland. So they about equal each other off in terms of transfers back and forth. That's a pretty large number of transfers from one boundary to another boundary. Harding has the largest number of transfers out, 290. Some Harding neighborhoods, and you'll see that when we go through it, have virtually no kids left in them that go to Harding. They all go out to other schools. For instance, for Adams, you notice there's 38 transfers out of Adams. Well, that's not a good one to look at. I should look at some of the others, but certain areas of Harding, like this area here and this area here, they have a lot of students in those areas, but they don't go to Harding school. So that's the overall. Now we can look at them one at a time if you have a particular one, or we can just go through and you can indicate, but it's now your board discussion of the data. So why don't we start with the Adams School we have right here. Is there anybody who has any questions, or what do you want to do?
I was just about to ask the board how they would like to proceed. Do we want to go in sheet by sheet, school by school, or do we want to ask more generalized questions?
Seem to put them up on the screen and we can look at it and if questions asked about it.
You all have them beforehand, so I suspect
Right.
you may have questions.
Okay.
You want to go to one first, or you go through, okay, this is Adams. Any questions about Adams and the transfers in Adams?
Well, I guess I just have a comment about the Peabody enrollment at Adams, and I think we'll see that as we look at Peabody in that it is, well, they're so interrelated, but Peabody, I was surprised to see the number of transfers in, given that they constantly are saying that they're too full for the kids that are boundaried there. And I'm not sure if we broke it out by grade, if we might see that it's a lot more in the upper grades than there are in the lower grades that are coming from another boundary, but you know, we can't see that. But it has been a point, Peabody students, it's a charter school, but it has a boundary. They essentially need a home school, and so I know that the district has essentially been giving Adams as their home school so that they have a home, they have a place to go, and that they're not relying on there being a space available someplace and it being completely random. So I noticed that. I'll say this for all of the schools, that I was really, and I've seen this before, but to see it, I've seen the drawing numbers, but to see it graphically this way, and I want to thank you, and I know Linda Steele worked on this, it really, it brought it home how many of our schools are, have just a really large number of transfers. And for a lot of them, it's this, you know, kind of roughly the same number going out, and the same coming in, or kind of equivalent. And it's just interesting, and we do see these areas where there's tendencies for I was noticing the number of Washington downtown boundary kids that don't want to be bused up to Washington and end up at Franklin, and then you have other issues with groups of certain ethnicities deciding they're going to go to this school or that school. So that was really interesting to see, but I did want to say that about Peabody going to Adams.
You're referring to the 76 students, which is the largest in the district, going from Peabody into Adams, right here. 67 Hispanic and 7 white.
And that may change with the change in the deadline and the lottery. Mr. Herron?
I was just gonna say, over a period of time, that will change, because those who are there now will stay until they graduate, but with their new process, more and more in-district, in-boundary students will get accepted. It'll take several years, but I think I see those numbers changing dramatically after a few years.
Well, we go to the next one then, and we can just go through these if you don't have any questions. Oh, I can roll it? Okay, let's see if I can. Yeah, okay. So here's Cleveland, 294 in boundary, and here's the transfers. You can see the numbers, 12, 68. Not very many from any other school though, it's mainly from Franklin.
You know, before you move off that one, it occurred to me that some of those Franklin families may like year-round school, which is why they're moving to Cleveland. This is a question that actually relates to some of the other charts as well. On this one, you have ethnicity broken out in Peabody and Adams and Harding, but not in the other schools. Is that because that data was available through those principals and you don't have it from the other schools?
It was a time issue. We've been working on this, updating it to get it into the board report for this meeting. We got all the schools we could. I actually have penciled in a little bit more data on my charts. If you had a question like that, I might be able to answer it.
No, I was just wondering the why, but you've answered that, so thank you.
And here's Franklin, and here you can see the 63 from Cleveland into Franklin. And once again, not too many from any other, but you see the 30 down here. That's probably mainly from this area. And here's Harding. Harding has 43 students from Adams, and then that's about it. There's a few from other places, but obviously there's quite a few students from Adams, and I believe they're mainly from this area down in here. I know that's true. They're mainly from this area here where they can just walk 2 or 3 blocks to Harding. Which
Mrs.
is
Parker.
And I wanted to comment on that because these boundaries were put in about 1980 when Wilson and Lincoln were closed, and there was real concern about having integrated schools and putting busing in to support some of that integration. But one of the things that happened, I think, was this sort of little piece over by Harding that got put into the Adams boundary, and we're currently busing those students over. It certainly makes no difference to Adams in terms of the demographics, the way I think it would have in the early 80s. And it makes it questionable for Harding, for families that are so close to Harding, about whether or not there's going to be space for them to get into Harding. And so I would hope that we would revisit that boundary, particularly since we're paying for busing there. If there's some way for us to reduce the cost and realign that boundary, that's something I'd be very interested in.
Okay. Here's McKinley, and this is McKinley, get my button here, down here. And once again, very few students moving into McKinley, the most coming from Harding, but it's pretty stable. Monroe. Monroe has a lot of students moving into it, and when I first put this together, I was curious as to whether it'd be mainly white, but actually, if I was to pull up Monroe's numbers here, for the ones that aren't on there, for instance, for, just gotta get past here. From the Washington area, there's 23, but they're mainly Latinos moving into Monroe. And from McKinley area here, there's 59, and they're almost all Latinos moving over to Monroe. So there's a lot of Latino movement into Monroe, which I was not necessarily expecting that high Latino movement moving over to Monroe. But 57. So there's these neighborhood schools, a lot of them are moving into Monroe. Monroe's got the largest number of intra-district transfers into that school.
And I would just, if I may just chime in on that, that may partially because it has so much capacity, because there aren't very many students, comparatively speaking, within its own boundaries.
You would have 137 less students, I think is what I have.
Actually, that is the school that typically has room, because there aren't as many kids just automatically enrolling. So it's been that school that in years past, in the summertime, when we're trying to find spots, Monroe's the place where we can usually place them.
Well, I would think on the other side of Las Positas there, on the, I guess that's the west side, there's probably not a lot of children in that neighborhood.
Which neighborhood are you over here?
Well, it's adjacent to Hope Ranch, yeah,
Right
right
over here.
yeah.
And then here's the Peabody one, and we got a few more details. We filled this one in because we knew it was one of the ones of concern. And for Peabody, they had the closest to the equal numbers. They had 71 white intra-district transfers in and 93 Latino intra-district transfers in. 65, this is the number down here, which is really large. And Roosevelt's got a few from Franklin and from some of the neighboring areas, but the other farther out schools do not have as many.
Dr. Hayden, may I ask, do you know the Franklin ethnicity breakout to Roosevelt?
Yes, I do. 13 white, 29 Latino. So once again, it's mainly Latinos transferring in. And Santa Barbara Community Academy, which is a full district, its boundary is the entire district. So this is just where they're drawing from. And they're located right there, is that where they're located? Somewhere right around there. Somewhere right there. And obviously, since they're located right there, it looks like they're getting quite a few from the Peabody students. They're getting quite a few from this area right here. But they're spread out. And here's Washington's distribution. And once again, there is a large number of students in this area right here, of which only 3 of all the students in this area here go to Harding School. 63 are going to Washington, 44 are white students. So and 50 students here are going to Washington. So they have a pretty large transfer in.
Yeah, it's actually really dramatic in that case to see the white students transferring into Washington from,
The Harding School.
well, we can see from Harding and Adams, and, we can't see for Monroe and Roosevelt what that looks like.
36 white students from Monroe,
Wow.
and from Roosevelt, 12 white students. Okay, so the next set, switch to that one, and then these just are the breakdown in the neighborhoods. You saw Adams already, and I mentioned that there's a large number of, there's many more students here than the 46 and 70, and they go to Harding. Okay, next one. Oh, I got that right. Here's Harding, and which I was mentioning, there's 3 and 0, and there's just way more students in this area than 3 and 0. And here's Monroe. And here's a more detailed one on Peabody. This is the area where it gets really steep. 62 students live here, but only 36 go to Peabody. So these students are in the Peabody in boundary area, but they're not going there. 95 students, but only 56 go to Peabody. 136, but only 67. 79, but only 50. And then as you get closer to Peabody, it gets stronger to full representation. So that's my inter-district and intra-district boundaries data. We can fill this out more, we can do more work. What do you want me to do with this at this point? That's the question I have for you.
One thing is I'd like to see your sheet, Mr. Het-Young's overhead display that has some of the interesting points that you were looking at.
Oh.
And why don't we put that brief, so you have that in print as well.
Sure. It's just the points I put together just to mention to you. There's a nice little table here that shows transfers in, transfer out differential. Monroe having the largest differential of 137 and Washington next. And of course, Harding having the lowest at 206. Minus 206.
I want to add too, when I saw this stuff, I said, is that the same number that we have in our student services as far as the applications for intra-districts and all? And I understand that we're cleaning all that up and we're making sure that that is accurate because, you know, we always knew we were off a bit, that we would every once in a while find a student or two that had no transfer on file at all and had been at school for 3 or 4 years. And so all of that's really coming together, and this was very helpful with that.
Well, I do think this gives us a lot to think about, and I like Mrs. Parker's observation that there might be some funding savings if we were to reconsider some of those boundaries in terms of transporting students farther away from their home school.
I think the issue here would be that you would still be in open district in terms of intra-district transfers. So I suspect that if you change that boundary, I may be wrong on this, that the students could still choose which school to try to go to.
Sure. But if they were just starting out and there were families in the neighborhood, they might choose to walk to Harding instead.
Exactly.
I would like to see some of this information tied into our busing. I don't think that we would, I personally would be very careful about looking at the busing that goes on for Washington and Monroe, for example, because I do think that those boundaries are still really important in terms of trying to promote integrated schools. But there may be places where it doesn't make a difference anymore. And we could streamline bus routes if we had slightly different bus boundaries. So that's something to think about. I think that the Adams-Harding boundary is something to look at, and just the situation with Peabody where, as I said when they were here asking for some minor enrollment procedure changes, I think that it's going to be very hard on those families as they move forward with their new lottery process, and for them really to no longer have or feel like if they're aggressive enough, they can, they'll get first rights because they're the first in line for the school, and I think it's going to cause a lot of angst, and I think that we would all be better off with Peabody and Adams and the district as a whole if boundaries were looked at again rather than saying it's going to be a lottery process. But again, I know that has to go up to the State Board of Education, and both of our boards would need to agree on it. But I just think that's going to be really hard on Peabody families to have so many more students than there is capacity for, and to have to go through a lottery and to not know if their kid's going to get in. Okay,